The day began like any other, with the sun rising over the city skyline and the usual hustle and bustle of people going about their morning routines. I had no idea that today would be the day my life, and possibly the fate of humanity, would be changed forever. I was just enjoying a walk in the park, trying to clear my head from the stress of work, when something caught my eye. At first, it was nothing more than a flicker in the sky, like a strange reflection or a trick of the light. But the shimmer grew, distorting the air in a way that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I stopped walking, squinting at the sky. It looked like a cloud, but it wasn't a cloud. It wasn't anything I had ever seen before. My heart began to race as the shape started to materialize, a massive disk, hovering silently in the sky, its edges glinting with the reflection of the sun. The people around me hadn't noticed yet, caught up in their own routines, but then it started to hum. Low at first, like the vibration of a distant thunderstorm, and then louder, a deep, resonating tone that seemed to vibrate through my very bones. People turned to look, their faces going from confusion to fear in an instant. Some screamed and ran, others stood frozen, staring up at the ship in disbelief. I stood there, my feet rooted to the ground, unable to look away. The ship was impossibly sleek, its surface smooth and gleaming, without a hint of rivets or seams. It was as if it had been carved from a single, flawless piece of material. The air around it shimmered, distorting the view as if it were some sort of advanced technology I couldn't begin to comprehend. Without warning, the ship lowered toward the ground. It wasn't a gradual descent as you might expect from something of its size. It hovered, almost imperceptibly, before touching down on the park lawn, creating a gentle but noticeable tremor that sent ripples through the nearby pond. The moment it landed, the noise stopped, leaving an eerie silence hanging in the air. For a moment, everything seemed frozen. Time itself felt like it had been suspended. Then, the ramp extended from the ship's belly, and out of it stepped a figure. The alien woman who emerged was unlike anything I had ever seen. She was tall and slender, her skin a soft blue-green, shimmering faintly in the daylight. Her features were sharp but graceful, with eyes that glowed a deep gold, radiating a quiet power. She wore a uniform of sorts, dark and intricately designed, with patterns that seemed to shift and change as she moved. Her presence was both intimidating and oddly beautiful, like a force of nature that couldn't be ignored. She stepped forward, her eyes scanning the crowd, and then she locked eyes with me. For a moment, I felt the weight of her gaze, and I knew, without a doubt, that she wasn't just looking at me. She was studying me. A wave of unease washed over me, but also something else. A strange pull, as if something within me was stirring. The alien spoke then, her voice clear and authoritative. "Human," she said, her tone heavy with a strange cadence. "We come in peace." It was the calmness of her voice that unsettled me more than anything. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't here to invade or attack. She spoke with the confidence of someone who had done this many times before, someone who had no doubt about what would happen next. I tried to respond, my mind racing for the right words, but then something strange happened. Without meaning to, I found myself speaking, not in English, but in a language that was completely alien to me. The words spilled out of my mouth before I could stop them, an ancient, melodic tongue that felt both foreign and oddly familiar. "Onkarai rivat zalesht," I said, my voice trembling. The moment the words left my lips, everything went silent. The alien's eyes widened in shock, her golden gaze fixed on me with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. She took a step forward, her eyes never leaving mine, and then she spoke, her voice low but filled with disbelief. "You speak the dead language of our ancestors?" she asked, the shock in her tone impossible to miss. I froze. I had no idea what was happening. My mind was reeling. I had never heard this language before in my life, so how could I be speaking it now? I opened my mouth to protest, but the words wouldn't come. I didn't know what to say. All I could do was stand there, trying to make sense of what had just happened. This wasn't possible. This wasn't real. And yet I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow something inside me had known these words, as though they had been buried deep within me, waiting for the right moment to be unleashed. The alien woman continued to stare at me, her expression a mix of surprise and awe. Slowly, as if uncertain of what she was seeing, she took another step forward. I didn't know what to do, what to say. I could only watch as the strange encounter unfolded before me, realizing that my life had just changed in ways I couldn't begin to understand. And the feeling that this was just the beginning, that sensation lingered in my chest, heavy and undeniable. The air aboard the Tazorel was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't just the strange alien architecture or the advanced technology that made my mind spin. It was the sheer quiet. There was a hum, a constant, almost imperceptible vibration that resonated throughout the ship. But other than that, the silence was unnerving. No background chatter, no clattering of footsteps. Everything seemed peaceful, too peaceful. Aaron led me down long, metallic hallways, the walls pulsing faintly with light. The ship itself felt alive, like it was breathing or responding to our presence. The doors slid open effortlessly at her command, and I was struck by the sophistication of the interior. Sleek surfaces, soft ambient lighting, and devices I couldn't even begin to comprehend. It was a far cry from the noisy, bustling cities of Earth. The contrast between our two worlds felt jarring. She brought me to a large room that appeared to serve as the Tazoral's central meeting area, the walls lined with holographic screens displaying star maps, intricate designs, and alien symbols I couldn't recognize. I was about to sit when Erin motioned to a seat opposite a large, circular table, her gaze serious. There was no warmth in her tone, only curiosity and something else. Worry, perhaps? "Jake," she began, her voice steady but tense. "We need to understand how you came to speak our language. This is not something you could have learned in a few moments. No human has ever spoken it before. It's not possible." Her eyes fixed on me with an intensity I couldn't escape. "Tell me, how do you know the words you spoke?" I shook my head, my hands trembling slightly as I remembered the feeling of the words spilling out of my mouth, almost against my will. "I don't know. I don't understand. They just came to me." One moment I was thinking about what to say, and the next thing I knew, the words were there, coming out of me. I didn't even mean to say them. Erin was silent for a moment, processing my words. Her brow furrowed and she took a step closer, her gaze narrowing as if looking for something more in my face, some hidden truth I hadn't yet revealed. "This is strange. The language you spoke is from an era long lost to us. We call it the Zilra, the tongue of our ancient ancestors. It hasn't been spoken for millennia. In fact, most of our people don't even know it exists. It was erased from our history after the Great Cataclysm." I looked at her, unsure of what to say. This was a lot to take in. The last thing I expected when I stepped into that park this morning was to be sitting across from an alien who was talking about ancient civilizations and lost languages. Yet, here I was. So, what does that mean? How am I speaking it? Erin sighed, the sound heavy with frustration or perhaps disbelief. "I don't know, but it's not a coincidence, Jake. There's a reason you're able to speak this language, a reason you were chosen." Her eyes softened for a brief moment, though her words remained firm. "This language was not meant for the ears of humans, yet here you are. I need to understand how this happened." I glanced around the room, trying to grasp some semblance of normalcy, but everything felt off-kilter. I had no answers for her, no explanation. All I could tell her was that it felt right when I spoke those words, like they were part of me, buried in some forgotten part of my mind. It was as though I had been waiting for something, waiting for this moment, for this connection, even though I had no idea why. Erin paced the room, occasionally stopping to glance at the holographic displays. Her thoughts seemed far away, as if she were piecing together a puzzle with pieces that didn't quite fit. Finally, she stopped, turning toward me with a look of resolve. "This is not just some random event, Jake. Your ability to speak Zilra, this may be linked to something far more important. Our ancient texts spoke of a human who would come among us, a human who could speak our lost language and unite our people with Earth. Could you be the one they spoke of?" I opened my mouth to deny it, but something about the way she said it, so calm, so certain, stopped me. Could I? Was I really the key to something much bigger than myself? The thought made my chest tighten. I was just a regular guy, an office worker with no extraordinary talents, no knowledge of alien cultures. Yet here I was, caught in something I couldn't escape, tied to this strange fate. Erin didn't seem to be waiting for my answer. She seemed lost in her thoughts, her fingers lightly tapping against the control panel of one of the screens. "We need to know everything, your memories, your experiences. You may not remember now, but your mind might hold the key to unlocking something we've been searching for." She paused, looking at me with a mixture of hope and caution. "The Tezoral people need your help, Jake. Earth needs your help." I swallowed, trying to steady my nerves. My thoughts were racing. "What do you mean? How can I help you?" Erin's eyes softened, and she seemed to choose her words carefully. "The Tezoral are at a crossroads. We are a peaceful people, but our enemies, the rogue factions within our society, are growing more powerful. They believe in domination, in control, and they will not hesitate to use any means necessary to achieve their goals. We need allies. And Earth could be our greatest ally. But for that to happen, we need to bridge the gap between our two worlds. We need your help to unite us. You, Jake, might be the one who can make that happen." I didn't know how to respond to that. All of it felt too big for me, too far beyond my grasp. But one thing was clear. Whatever had happened to me, whatever connection I had to this ancient language and the Tezoral, it was leading me down a path I couldn't avoid. I wasn't just a bystander in some alien encounter anymore. I was part of something much larger, and though I had no idea what that something was, I knew I had to find out. Days passed in a blur, and the more time I spent aboard the Tezoral ship, the more I began to realize how little I understood about what was happening to me. Erin's presence was constant, and every moment we spent together was filled with questions, her probing attempts to uncover how I came to speak the ancient language and what it might mean for both our worlds. But the more I learned about the Tezoral, the less I felt like I was part of Earth anymore. It was like I had stepped into a story I couldn't fully comprehend, and every answer only led to more questions. Erin took me through their history, their culture, and their scientific advancements. The ship itself, as incredible as it was, seemed like a living extension of their civilization. The walls shifted and responded to commands in ways I couldn't even begin to understand. The technology was advanced, yes, but it wasn't cold and mechanical. It had a pulse, a rhythm that felt more organic than anything I'd ever seen on Earth. We spent hours in the ship's study, a vast room filled with scrolls, holographic records, and databanks that held the history of the Tezoral civilization. Erin was eager to show me everything, hoping that somehow, something in their past might trigger a memory or recognition in me. But the more I saw, the more I felt like an outsider, like a person who had wandered into a library of forgotten dreams. As we studied, Erin began to share stories about the Tezoral's ancient ancestors, the ones who had spoken the language I had somehow inherited. They were a proud and noble people, known throughout the galaxy for their wisdom and their artistic achievements. The Zillural language, though beautiful and complex, was also a symbol of their downfall. After the Great Cataclysm, a war that had torn their civilization apart, the language had been banned, erased from their collective history. Its very existence was considered taboo by many. I was beginning to understand how significant this language was to them, how deep its loss ran. Aaron explained that the language was tied to their spirituality and culture. To speak it was to connect with their ancestors, with a time when the Tezoral had been at peace and prosperous. To hear it spoken was to invoke memories of a lost golden age. One evening, as we sat before a holographic display of ancient texts, something in me shifted. I couldn't explain it, but it was as if a door inside my mind had cracked open just a little bit. I saw the symbols of the Zilra language. Lines, curves, intricate patterns that seemed to dance before my eyes. For the first time, it felt like I wasn't just seeing random shapes, but something I could understand on a deep, instinctive level. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the air, tracing the characters as if my hand was guided by some invisible force. Erin watched me intently, her golden eyes narrowing with a mix of surprise and curiosity. "You're reading it," she said softly. I nodded, but even I was unsure of what had just happened. It wasn't as if I had consciously decided to read those ancient characters. It was like my mind was remembering something I had long since forgotten. "You're tapping into something, Jake," Erin said. Her voice was cautious, as if she were afraid of what that something might mean. "There's more to you than you realize. You're not just speaking our language, you're reconnecting with our history." I looked at her, bewildered. "What do you mean?" Erin paused for a moment, her fingers hovering over the holographic display. "The Zilra language was never meant to be lost. It said that only one who has an ancient bond with the Tezoral can unlock its true power, its true meaning. It's possible that you—" She broke off, as if unsure how to continue. I wasn't sure what she meant by an ancient bond, but my chest tightened at the thought. The more I learned, the more it felt like I had been brought into this strange world for a reason. I had never believed in fate, never thought much about prophecies or destiny, but now it was hard to ignore the feeling that this had all been set into motion long before I ever stepped into that park. "Are you saying this isn't a coincidence?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. "That I'm supposed to be here, doing this?" Arian met my gaze, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then she nodded. "It's not a coincidence, Jake. You may not remember it yet, but you have a connection to our people. You're more than just a human. You're something else, something ancient. And I think we're on the verge of discovering why." I stared at her, the weight of her words settling in. I had never been special, never felt like I was part of anything larger than myself. But standing in that room, surrounded by the history of a civilization I could barely understand, I began to realize that maybe I was. And maybe, just maybe, this language, this lost connection, was the key to something that could change everything. Erin began speaking again, but her words blurred into the background. I wasn't listening to her anymore. I was thinking about the strange pull inside me, the one that made me speak the Zilra language without even knowing how. Something about it felt familiar, like a half-remembered dream or a whisper from another time. It was as if my mind was reaching across the stars to something buried deep within me, something tied to these people. Erin's voice broke through my thoughts again. "We need to learn all we can. If you are indeed the one who can bridge our worlds, the prophecy may be true. Earth needs us, Jake. The Tezoral cannot stand alone much longer." I nodded slowly, but the enormity of her words hit me like a freight train. My life had just taken a turn I couldn't undo. I wasn't just studying an ancient language anymore. I was part of a prophecy, part of something far bigger than myself. And whether I was ready or not, I was going to have to figure out what it all meant. The next few days were a blur of research, ancient texts, and uncomfortable silence as I tried to digest everything that had been happening. Erin had been patient, but there was an edge to her that I hadn't seen before, a sense of urgency that came with the weight of what she believed was at stake. She was convinced that I held the key to bridging our two worlds, but I wasn't sure how I fit into her vision. I was just a guy who had spoken a dead language by accident, nothing more. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. The ship was vast, and I was still only getting familiar with its many rooms and corridors. Despite the constant flow of data, maps, and ancient writings, I spent a lot of my time alone, wandering its hallways and gazing out into the endless void of space. The stars outside seemed distant, almost unreachable, like they were part of a dream I wasn't sure I belonged to. But every now and then, I'd catch glimpses of Erin or another member of her crew passing by. Each of them had that same distant, calculating expression that suggested they were all living in a world far removed from mine. One morning, as I sat in the study, trying to make sense of a set of alien symbols that Erin had shown me, something inside me shifted again. The patterns on the screen began to pulse, just as the Zilra language had done before. I didn't know what it was, but the symbols suddenly clicked. It was like something unlocked deep within me, as if I had known these patterns all my life. My fingers moved over the screen before I could even think, tracing the lines and curves, connecting the dots. Slowly, the pieces of the puzzle started to come together. The symbols weren't just random, they were messages, stories, messages from an era I couldn't even begin to comprehend. My heart raced as I deciphered more and more, the strange feeling of recognition growing stronger with each new discovery. Erin appeared in the doorway, watching me as I worked. Her eyes were wide, a mix of surprise and something else. Was it hope? I didn't know. She'd seen me attempt to make sense of these texts before, but this was different. There was something in the way I was moving, in the way the symbols responded to me. She took a few tentative steps forward, her voice low. "Jake, what are you seeing?" I didn't answer at first. I was too focused, too wrapped up in this new discovery. I felt like I was in a trance, the symbols calling to me, pulling me deeper. Finally, I looked up at her, breathless. It's a message, Erin. A prophecy, I think." She stepped closer, her gaze intense. "A prophecy?" I nodded, my mind racing. "I don't know all of it yet, but I think it's talking about the time of the Great Cataclysm and how the Tzoral were supposed to be reunited with the humans. It says, the bridge between our worlds will be built by someone who carries the past of both our peoples." Erin's expression shifted. She seemed to be processing the words, trying to understand their full meaning. "And you think you're the one they were referring to?" I hesitated. A part of me wanted to deny it. This was all so far-fetched. I wasn't special, wasn't some hero who could unite two worlds. But the truth was, every part of me, every instinct was telling me that I was the one they'd been waiting for. The language, the symbols, they were calling me to something beyond myself. "I think so," I said, my voice quiet but certain. "But I don't know how to make it happen. I don't even know what the next step is." Erin's eyes softened, and for the first time, I saw something akin to vulnerability in her gaze. "We'll figure it out together. You don't have to do this alone, Jake. We're all in this with you." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I'd been so focused on my confusion and fear that I hadn't thought about the people around me, the ones who believed in me, who trusted that I could do something important. But Erin wasn't just talking about her own people. She was talking about me, too. She believed that I had a role to play, even if I didn't fully understand what it was yet. As I sat there, staring at the symbols on the screen, I realized something. The language, the texts, the strange connection I felt with the Tzoral. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was part of something bigger, something that was about to unfold in ways I couldn't predict. "We need to get this message to Earth," Erin said suddenly, her voice firm. "We need to start preparing for what's coming. The rogue factions, the ones who still seek to destroy everything we've built. They won't wait, and they'll never accept the idea of humans and Tzoral working together." I stood up, my mind racing. The stakes were higher than I had imagined. It wasn't just about uncovering a lost language or ancient prophecies. There was something much darker on the horizon, something that threatened both our worlds. So, what do we do next? Aaron's eyes hardened with determination. We prepare for the worst. We find a way to unite our people, both the Tazorel and Earth, before it's too late. The message you've uncovered, it's only the beginning. And just like that, everything shifted again. I wasn't just an accidental player anymore. I had a purpose, a mission that I couldn't ignore. The connection between our worlds was fragile, and there were forces out there who wanted to tear it all apart. The road ahead was uncertain, and I had no idea what would come next. But I knew one thing for sure. It was a road I had to walk, whether I was ready or not. The days that followed were a whirlwind of planning, strategy, and mounting tension. We spent hours reviewing the messages, the ancient texts, and the symbols I had uncovered. The more we decoded, the clearer the picture became. The prophecy wasn't just about a bridge between our worlds. It was about a rebirth, a new era where both humans and Tazorial would unite against a common enemy. But the enemy wasn't just external. It was within the Tazorial themselves. A faction of their people, led by the warlord Tsar, had been silently building an army, preparing to seize power and dominate the galaxy. They believed in the Tazorial's superiority and were willing to destroy everything to maintain that belief. Aaron was convinced that Zill's faction would stop at nothing to prevent the unification of humans and Tazorial. They viewed the idea as an abomination, an affront to the purity of their species. The warlord's forces were already mobilizing, and time was running out. But Aaron had a plan. She believed that if I could speak the Zilra language fluently, the ancient bond would be reawakened in the Tazorial, and they would rally behind me as the leader of a united people. I wasn't sure how that was supposed to work, but the more we discussed it, the more it started to feel like my role in all of this was already written. I had become the face of this unification, whether I liked it or not. Aaron and her people were working on diplomatic channels with Earth, preparing for the first contact between our two civilizations. Messages had already been sent, but we needed time. Time to build trust, time to prepare, and most importantly, time to stop Tsar before his forces could strike. One evening, as we gathered around a large console in the ship's war room, Aaron looked at me with a level of seriousness that sent a chill down my spine. "We need you to go to Earth, Jake," she said, her voice unwavering. "We need to deliver the message of unity directly. If we don't act quickly, Jar will start his campaign. The longer we wait, the more his influence spreads." I stared at her, my mind racing. Earth? Me? I was no diplomat. I was just a guy who had learned a dead language by accident. There were hundreds of people far more qualified to represent humanity than me. "I don't understand," I said, trying to make sense of it all. "Why me? Why not someone with more experience?" Aaron's eyes softened, but there was no mistaking the weight in her gaze. "Because you are the one who can speak the language. You are the one who has already unlocked the key to bridging our two worlds. It's not about experience, Jake. It's about destiny." I was quiet for a long time, my thoughts spinning. I didn't feel destined for anything. I was just a guy who had stumbled into something that I didn't understand. But I couldn't deny that there was a pull, a deep connection that had been awakened inside me when I spoke the language. It was as if the very act of speaking it had opened something in me, something ancient and powerful. "We can teach you everything you need to know," Aaron continued. "The history of the Tazor, the ways of diplomacy. The Earth delegation will be hesitant at first, but with you speaking our language, it will break down barriers. We can make them understand that this is the only way forward." I could see the urgency in her eyes, the quiet desperation. The fate of two worlds rested on the shoulders of a man who had only just learned to speak an ancient language. The gravity of the situation was overwhelming, but at the same time, it felt inevitable. Somehow, in ways I couldn't explain, I was tied to this mission, to this moment. Elon relay. I'll do it, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Erin's face softened, a flicker of relief crossing her features. Thank you, Jake. You don't understand yet, but this is bigger than all of us. And so the preparations began. I was no longer just an accidental ambassador. I was the chosen messenger, the bridge between our two civilizations. The days became a blur of briefings, simulations, and lessons on Tzorel culture. They taught me how to speak the language more fluently, how to act as a leader in the presence of their people, how to navigate the complex web of politics that governed their society. But all the lessons in the world couldn't prepare me for what awaited on Earth. The messages we sent ahead had been met with suspicion. People were scared, unsure of what an alliance with an alien race would mean. Fear of the unknown had taken root, and I was about to be thrust into the heart of that fear. I didn't know if I could convince them, or if the Tzorel and Earth could ever truly unite. As I prepared to leave the Tzorel ship and head back to Earth, a strange sense of finality settled over me. There was no turning back. If I failed, everything I had learned, everything we had worked for, would unravel. But as the ship's engines powered up and we made our way toward Earth, I couldn't help but wonder if it was all worth it. Could one man truly change the fate of two worlds? Could I be the one to make that difference? I didn't know, but I was about to find out. The journey back to Earth felt like an eternity, even though the ship's advanced technology made the trip incredibly fast. Every moment was filled with uncertainty. As I sat in the quiet of my quarters aboard the Tzorel ship, I kept thinking about the enormity of what I was about to face. I wasn't just returning home. I was carrying a message, one that could alter the course of history for both Earth and the Tzorel. It felt like the weight of two worlds was pressing down on me, and I wasn't sure if I could bear it. Erin had been a constant presence over the past few days, offering guidance, support, and occasional reassurance. But even she couldn't hide the tension in her voice when she spoke about Earth. The delegation there had already been briefed on the potential unification, but there was so much fear, so many unknowns. The Tzorel were a powerful people, but they were also enigmatic, strange. For many, an alliance seemed more like a threat than an opportunity. The fear of what might happen if things went wrong was palpable. Jake, when you get to Earth, they'll be waiting for you, Erin had told me before we made the jump to Earth's orbit. Be prepared for resistance, but remember, your words, your knowledge of the Zilra language, it's your greatest weapon. Speak with certainty, with the authority of the Ancient Ones, and they'll listen. They have to. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that the language I had learned would be enough to convince Earth's leaders to set aside their doubts, but I had spent my entire life in the mundane, in the practical. I wasn't a diplomat, and I wasn't some charismatic leader. I was just Jake, a guy who'd stumbled into this mess. I wasn't sure if I had the authority Erin spoke of, or if my words would even be heard above the fear and suspicion that would certainly greet me. As the ship neared Earth, I could see the blue-green orb of our planet through the observation window. It felt unreal. I had been to Earth 1,000,000 times before, but this time was different. I was returning as something else, as someone who was supposed to bridge the gap between us and an alien species that had once been our enemy. It was overwhelming. When the ship finally docked at a secure facility just outside of Washington, D.C., my heart was pounding in my chest. I stood in front of the mirror in my quarters, adjusting the unfamiliar Tzorel uniform they had given me. It was sleek and metallic, designed to look like their ancient ceremonial attire, but with modern modifications to suit the ship's atmosphere. The weight of the uniform seemed symbolic, like a tangible reminder of the responsibility now placed on my shoulders. Erin was with me as I prepared to step out into the unknown. "You're ready, Jake," she said, her voice steady, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "Remember, it's not just about speaking the language. It's about showing them the possibility of peace, the power of unity. They need to see that this is a chance for something better." I nodded, Though my throat was tight, I didn't feel ready. But there was no time to waste. Earth was waiting, and the Tezoral had entrusted me with their future. When the doors opened, I was met with a dozen faces. Military officials, diplomats, and scientists, all standing in a sterile, high-tech meeting room. There were cameras, flashing lights, and the murmur of voices as they took in my arrival. I had expected some sort of grand welcome, but this was not a celebration. It was an interrogation. I stepped forward, my boots clicking against the metal floor, my breath shallow. The tension in the room was suffocating. Every eye was on me, studying me, judging me. I couldn't help but feel like an outsider, like an imposter standing in front of people who had no idea what to make of me. The lead diplomat, a woman named Susan Calder, stepped forward. Her face was a mask of professionalism, but her eyes betrayed a mix of curiosity and skepticism. "Jake, welcome," she said. "You're the one who's been speaking the ancient language of the Tezoral?" I nodded. "Yes," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "And I'm here to speak on behalf of both our worlds. There is an opportunity here, an opportunity for peace, for a new alliance." Her eyes flicked to the others in the room, and I could sense the unease in the air. "We've read the reports, Jake," she said, her tone calm but firm. "But you must understand, uniting with the Tezoral is a delicate matter. Our world is not ready for such a bold move. There are many who are skeptical, who fear what an alliance with them might mean." I took a deep breath, drawing on everything Aaron had taught me. I couldn't afford to falter now. "I understand your fears," I said, my voice carrying more authority than I felt. "But this is our chance to secure a future for both our peoples. The Tezoral have much to offer us, and we can offer them something too. Together we could forge a path forward, one that avoids the mistakes of the past." I paused, watching as the room fell into silence. I could feel the weight of their gaze, the doubt, the skepticism, but also something else, a glimmer of hope. It was fragile, like the first light of dawn breaking through a storm. I knew this wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time since I had left Earth, I felt something stir inside me. Maybe, just maybe, I could make them believe in this vision. Maybe I was the bridge between two worlds, not just because of the language I spoke, but because of the hope I could offer. "Let me show you," I said, my voice growing stronger. "Let me show you what this can mean, not just for the Tezoral, but for humanity." And for the first time, I wasn't sure what the next step would be, but I knew I had to take it. The following days were a blur of meetings, negotiations, and careful diplomacy. The delegation on Earth wasn't hostile, but they weren't exactly welcoming either. Every move I made was scrutinized, every word I spoke dissected. I felt like a pawn in a game that I didn't fully understand, but I had no choice but to play my part. The Tezoral had entrusted me with this mission, and it was quickly becoming clear that if we were going to make any headway, it would require more than just speaking the language. It would require convincing a planet full of people who had every reason to be afraid. At first, the skepticism from Earth's leaders was almost overwhelming. They had their own fears, their own doubts about the Tezoral. Despite Aaron's assurances, the Tezoral weren't universally seen as allies. Their power, their advanced technology, and their long history of conflict with humanity had left scars. And then there was the matter of Tsar, the rogue faction that was determined to prevent any kind of alliance between our worlds. They were a constant, looming threat, and I could see the hesitation in the eyes of the diplomats, the generals, the scientists. They were willing to listen, but only just. I spent hours meeting with representatives, trying to bridge the divide between what they feared and what the Tezoral offered. Every time I spoke in the Zeoral language, I could see something shift in their faces. It wasn't immediate. There was no sudden epiphany, but it was there. A flicker of recognition, as if the very sound of the words resonated on a deeper level. I knew that my ability to speak the language wasn't just a novelty. It was a connection to something ancient, something that could not be ignored. But it wasn't just the language that mattered. It was the way I presented myself, the way I spoke of the Tesoral and their potential for peace. Aaron had coached me, drilled into me, that I needed to embody the spirit of unity that she so passionately believed in. "You're not just telling them the truth," she had said. "You're showing them. The Zilra language carries the weight of our history, but it also carries the possibility of our future. They need to see that." The turning point came in a tense meeting with General Harris, one of Earth's most influential military leaders. He had been vocal in his opposition to the alliance, citing the risks of combining our military forces with a species like the Tesoral. He argued that the Tesoral's power was too great, that they could never be trusted. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of doubt, that made me press harder. "I understand your concerns," I said, standing before him in the sleek, metallic Tesoral uniform. "But I've seen the Tesoral. They're not conquerors. They've learned from their past. We can't continue to live in fear of each other forever. If we do, we'll only be feeding the very darkness we're trying to avoid." I spoke with more conviction than I felt. The words weren't just coming from my training. They were coming from somewhere deep inside me, somewhere I hadn't fully tapped into until now. General Harris studied me for a long moment, his eyes narrowing as if weighing my words against the fears that had held him captive for so long. Then, to my surprise, he spoke softly, almost as if he were speaking more to himself than to me. "What if you're wrong?" he asked. I felt a lump rise in my throat, but I held my ground. "Then we fail. But if we don't try, if we let this chance slip away, we'll be living in a world of endless conflict, never knowing what could have been." There was silence for a long time, and then, slowly, Harris nodded. "Maybe you're right, but you'd better be sure, Jake, this isn't just some alliance. It's a gamble with a future." The rest of the meeting was a blur. The door opened and I was ushered out, but my heart was still pounding. Had I convinced him? I didn't know. But I knew that the moment of truth was coming fast. The Tesoral were gathering their forces, preparing to stand alongside us against the rogue factions. And the clock was ticking. As the days passed, the Earth delegation began to shift. It was subtle at first. Small changes in their language, less resistance when I spoke, more consideration given to the possibility of peace. But it wasn't until the final summit that I realized just how far we had come. I stood before a room full of Earth's leaders and the Tesoral's emissaries, the weight of the moment almost unbearable. Erin stood at my side, her gaze steady, her posture strong. For the first time since I had arrived on Earth, I didn't feel like an imposter. I felt like I was standing at the precipice of something monumental, something that would change everything. "Today," I began, my voice echoing in the quiet room, "we stand at the crossroads of history. We have a choice: to continue down the path of fear and division, or to take a step toward a new future, one built on cooperation, mutual understanding, and peace." I paused, looking around at the faces in the room. There was still hesitation, still doubt, but there was something else too: hope. The kind of hope that could spark a revolution, that could light a fire in the hearts of the people who had been so deeply entrenched in their own fears. "The Tesoral are not our enemies," I continued. "They're not invaders. They're our partners in a future where we all survive, where we all thrive. If we can unite, if we can look beyond the barriers that divide us, we can build something that will last for generations. Something better." I felt the weight of their gaze, the expectation, the tension, but I also felt something else, something I hadn't fully realized before. This was my purpose. I wasn't just the messenger. I was the one who could help make this happen. It wasn't about language or diplomacy or even history. It was about vision. And I was the one who had to help them see it. The silence that followed was deafening, but it was the kind of silence that came before something big, something powerful. For the first time, I believed in what I was saying. And as the leaders of Earth began to speak among themselves, I knew that the future of both our worlds was no longer uncertain. The path forward had been forged, and for the first time, I truly understood what Erin had meant when she said our was the bridge between our worlds, because in that moment I realized that I wasn't just part of the future, I was helping to create it.